Thanks to the our musicians that got us started off well today. Always a good way to start it with a bit of singing and some music. I have a real appreciation for that because I have no musical talent whatsoever. So I always appreciate those that have a good control over the musical side of things. So this is the first time I've been to your camp. Feel blessed to be able. This is also the first camp meeting that I've been able to attend since COVID. So I'm so glad that we're able to be back in person again. It's so nice to be able to see friendly faces. And even though this is the first time I've been to your camp, and out of the Canadian provinces, I would have to say that probably Manitoba and especially Saskatchewan have been the ones I've spent the least amount of time in. But there's still lots of friendly faces that I know from different areas around, including your treasurer secretary, who I've spent quite a bit of time in Newfoundland with. I'm originally from Newfoundland, and that's where I was living until joining ADRA. So today, we want to get into the lesson here a little bit. So the lesson today is the crucibles that come. I want to try to tie this to ADRA and ADRA's work as we work through the lesson here today. So I actually want to go to our memory text, which is, the memory text is the next one. I want to talk about what a crucible is first. And a crucible is it's a vessel that's used for smelting a substance that requires a high degree of heat. It also refers to a severe test or to a place or situation that may cause a change in a person or their character. Whenever I think of this, and as I looked at the whole lesson as a whole for this quarter, I always think of the refiner's fire, and I think of gold and how as gold goes through fire, it becomes more purified as it goes through that process, that refining process. I think it's like that for us as Christians as well. As we go through challenges, sometimes we wonder, why am I going through this challenge? But I do believe that the challenges we face help us to be better prepared for some other trials that may be coming, and it's also bringing us closer to Christ. So the memory verse is 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 12 and 13 that says, "Beloved, do not think it strange concerning the fiery trial, which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened to you, but rejoice to the extent that you partake of Christ's sufferings, that when his glory is revealed, you may also be glad with exceeding joy." I think of that time when we do get to heaven, and we look back and realize all the things that we've gone through. I believe that the trials we go through on this earth will help us to appreciate heaven even that much more when we do get there. But unfortunately, suffering is a present reality in our fallen world. When sin was allowed into this world, and when the first couple, Adam and Eve, when they sinned, it opened up this world to the consequences that come from that sin. And as Christians, we must learn to deal with the suffering and to learn from it. That's where I believe ADRA really comes in, is we have a role to play. Christians as a whole, I believe we have a role to play in trying to ease the suffering that we see in the world. And you don't have to look very far to see that suffering that takes place. So I really believe that ADRA has a very important role as the humanitarian arm of our Seventh-day Adventist Church, to be able to reach out and to be able to make a difference in the lives of many who are dealing with suffering. We know we're in a sinful world. We know there is going to be suffering, but we can do something to try to at least ease some of that suffering. So I do have a video here next that I want to share with you. It's kind of a summary video of the work that ADRA has been doing around the world over the past year. So to sit back and hopefully you'll be able to learn a bit more about the work we have here. I believe the video is about 7 or 8 minutes long.
ADRA is the humanitarian arm of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. With an established office presence in over 120 countries, ADRA is well positioned to act immediately when emergencies or disasters happen. Through the connections that our offices have with local Adventist church members, ADRA is able to quickly assemble a volunteer force that is ready to implement life-saving assistance to the survivors of natural and man-made calamities. Over the last year, ADRA Canada, through your support, has served communities devastated by typhoons, earthquakes, volcanoes, wildfires, and war. Fleeing their homes at a moment's notice leaves people helpless and vulnerable. ADRA responds with Christian love and compassion, providing water for the thirsty, food for the hungry, clothing for those in need, protection and shelter for the refugee, care for the sick, and psychosocial support for those in prisons of trauma and despair. In Yemen, a country torn apart by war for 8 years, you have fed the hungry and provided critical medical care to families facing what is being labeled as the world's worst humanitarian crisis right now. In the ongoing war in Ukraine, you are providing essential supplies to refugees fleeing across the border and families displaced within Ukraine. Your support is giving people the means to buy the most needed supplies. It provides them with shelter, food, and protection. One of the greatest disasters that ADRA works with every day is the slow tsunami of global poverty. Compounded by the stressors of COVID-19 and rapid inflation, more people live under a depressing and life-threatening cloud of poverty today than there have been in many years, even here in Canada. The ministry and mission of ADRA is to serve humanity so all may live as God intended. With justice, compassion, and love, we work to restore individuals, families, and communities to the health and wholeness that God intended for them. Through the Bright Project, your support is dramatically changing the lives of children by providing opportunities for them to return to and finish school. In Myanmar, Niger, and Sudan, countries plagued with internal conflict, young girls are now back in school, pursuing their dreams. Yesterday, they faced the bleak prospect of becoming a child bride. Today, because of ADRA's Bright Project, the doors of opportunity have opened wide. Last year, the Government of Canada extended their trust in ADRA by approving funding assistance for over $27 million for a project to serve vulnerable communities in Cambodia, Kenya, the Philippines, and Uganda. Your support of the ministry of ADRA helps us meet our contribution agreements for these kinds of extensive projects. Over the next 6 years, the Together Project will save lives and promote better health and opportunities for people living in extreme poverty. Over the last year, your kind gifts also relieved suffering right here at home. In partnership with the Ministries of Compassion projects conducted by Adventist churches across Canada, you and ADRA are serving neighbors in need. The fire season in British Columbia in 2021 was one of the worst on record. Because of your timely response, ADRA, local churches, and the British Columbia Conference were able to support evacuees with hot meals, shelter, food, and in-kind donations management. After devastating floods in BC filled homes with mud and waste, ADRA partnered with church volunteers from Abbotsford and Merritt to help vulnerable residents clean and restore their homes. In 2021, your support directly reached almost 900,000 people around the world and in Canada. Through 46 different projects in 26 countries, you have shared God's transformational love and care with those in need and changed their lives for the better.
Hi, I'm Steve Matthews, Executive Director for ADRA Canada. As we bring this video report to a close, I wanted to come in and offer a personal word of thanks for your support over the last year. We have all faced unique challenges this past year, and yet, even through these difficult times, your support of ADRA has increased. We are so encouraged by your faithful giving. We truly could not do this work without you. Together, we are making known God's true character of justice, compassion, and love to the most vulnerable around the world and here at home. May God bless you and guide you, protect and keep you through another year. Thank you so much for supporting the ministry of ADRA.
Yeah, so it's. I wish I could take each one of you to actually see our projects in person, but I guess a video will have to be the next best thing. I like to be able to show video rather than me just here trying to talk and explain, because when you can see that imagery, it helps understand a little bit more about the work that we do. And ADRA does an amazing work around the world. I feel very blessed to be a part of the ministry of ADRA. I've been at ADRA now for a little over 4 years, and I can say it's been a true blessing to just be part of such an amazing ministry. I spent the rest of my career before joining ADRA. I'm an environmental engineer is my background, and I spent most of my career as a project manager here, all domestic work in Canada, mostly in Ontario and in Newfoundland. So to be able to join such a ministry is a real blessing. So we have something that we can be proud of as a church when we look at how we're able to make tangible differences in the lives of so many people. Another thing that the lesson brought out is that we are stewards of our own spirituality. As stewards of our own spirituality, we need to learn to distinguish between different types of trials and suffering. So this will help us understand how to deal with crisis in our lives and to draw the best lessons. So it brings out about crucibles of Christians, crucibles of Satan, of sin, for salvation, and for protection. I remember when I first joined the Adventist church, and I didn't grow up Adventist. I actually joined the Adventist church in my mid-20s. And as I was studying through, I thought, okay, I've found the place, I've arrived. And the individual that I studied with, who has since become one of my best friends, he gave me some words of wisdom before I joined. He said, just be aware that when you make this decision to follow Christ fully, that doesn't mean that it's going to be an easy ride the whole way through. And I was glad that he told me that, because when you make that decision for Christ, Satan's not happy about that. He likes to turn the heat up a little bit on us when we make those decisions. So understanding that is important. But we need to remain faithful when sin attacks, to defend the truth above falseness, to testify that Christ is the Savior of the world. When we do these things, enemies may try to harm us or silence our testimony. When we think of the crucibles of Satan, he is an active and a real enemy. He wants to destroy us. He wants to harm us. His work, we see it all around us, whether it's through death, through suffering, through immorality, falsehood, and we see the realities of the attacks of Satan on God's people all around the world. Then there's the crucibles of sin. Sin always has its side effects. Sometimes God might remove the consequences for a bit, or sometimes, we have to understand how harmful our actions can be when we act upon sinful ways. So we see that playing out. There's also the crucibles for salvation. Beyond the consequences of our sin, God is worried about the sin itself, especially the sins that we refuse to confess. We need to look at confessing those sins and making those ties with God. And sometimes, for the crucibles for protection, sometimes God allows Satan to make us go through certain crucibles so that we are strengthened. I think of Job and the story of Job and the challenges and trials that he went through. He went through more than I think almost any of us could ever bear. But God knew God knew Job and knew what Job could go through. And in the end, we see the outcome from that. I just want to share with you a little bit about where ADRA works. So ADRA is, and you heard in the video that we're in approximately 120 countries around the world. ADRA Canada works with many of those countries, and it changes every year. But we are part of a global network. So the way that we work is ADRA has an office out of those 120 countries that were mentioned, we have an office in each one. We work with implementing partners on the ground. Your newly elected president was recently worked in one of those implementing offices that ADRA Canada works with when he was in Uganda. So the way we work is that our implementing partners identify the needs that are on the ground in their country. So they would, we're not there, we're not on the ground, so it's not good for us to come and say, okay, well, we believe you need this when there may be a greater need. So they work with their local communities in their countries to identify those needs. Then the implementing partners will identify the project. So when Pastor Charles was in Uganda, he was responsible for helping us to design a project that would be acceptable to the Canadian government to help us be able to get funding for that project. But a big part of our projects is we need to come up with matching funds for our projects. That's where our private donors come in, because we take the money that's donated to us and then we use that to access Canadian government funds. Oftentimes, for every dollar that's given to us, we're able to turn that into $4, $5, sometimes $10 to be able to help with that need. So I believe we do a good job of the loaves and the fishes story and how we multiply what's entrusted to us. ADRA Canada supplies the technical support to our implementing partners to be able to help them with the work on the ground. And then we provide the funds. So it was mentioned in the video about the number of countries that we're working in. So you can see here the map, the green countries. I'm not sure how big that is for you. Hopefully it's big enough to be able to decipher most of it. But the green countries are where we're doing development projects. The red ones are where we are doing emergency projects. And the ones that have green and red striped, they are countries where we have projects in development and emergency. I always tell people that the countries we work in are typically the places where everybody else is trying to leave. But we're the ones going into these places to be able to try to relieve some of the suffering that people are going through and try to make things better. Our goal, though, is not to stay in these countries. Our goal is to work ourselves out of a job. I wish we lived in a world where there was no need for an ADRA, because then we wouldn't see that suffering. But while we see that, that's why we're there. I know Ukraine is top of mind for many these days, and the crisis in Ukraine has really magnified the issues that we're seeing in the world today. ADRA Canada has been working in Ukraine since about 2014 with the Crimea Peninsula conflict that took place. We've been working there since then. We helped with building healthcare facilities there. We helped to restore a hospital in the country at that time. We provided water, sanitation, and hygiene support during that time. And also recently in 2020, we launched a COVID-19 response with our ADRA Ukraine office to try to help relieve suffering. But of course now with the invasion that's taken place of Ukraine, the situation has grown much more dire. We see that estimates are approximately 4 million people have actually fled Ukraine to surrounding countries and now spreading around the world. And on top of that, there are about 4 million internally displaced people within the country as well. So we're seeing about 20 to 25% of the population are currently displaced from their homes. Mostly people that have left from the east where the conflict is greatest and moving to other areas, either within their country or out of the country. ADRA Canada right now is implementing a little over $7 million worth of projects in Ukraine. $5 million that came from the Canadian government and a little over $2 million through the Canadian Food Grains Bank. The Canadian Food Grains Bank, which ADRA is a member of and is headquartered in Winnipeg, is a group of 15 different Christian organizations that have come together with the sole goal of basically a world without hunger. So that's we work together through that organization as well. This slide shows where we're working right now. Early reports indicated that ADRA had the largest footprint in this area of the world of any organization that was responding to the Ukraine, the Ukraine war and the refugee situation coming out of there. So that's something to really be able to identify that we had the largest footprint of any NGO in the world. We're responding in many different ways, whether it's providing cash to individuals so that they can purchase what's needed, providing shelter. We've also been first on the ground in many of these areas. For example, in Poland, in the first couple days when people were just flocking to the Polish border, the ADRA tents were the first things that people encountered as soon as they crossed the border. Keep in mind, this was in late February, early March, and their climate is kind of similar to a lot of Canada. Probably doesn't get quite as cold as it does here during the winter, but I mean they were dealing with below zero temperatures, and they were standing in line for 2 to 3 days for sometimes just to try to cross the border. So the first thing they received was to be able to come into an ADRA tent and to be able to get warmed up, get a warm meal, and just relax after this traumatic ordeal that they went through. I do have a little video here again that I just want to show to highlight some of this work.
We didn't think that we were hungry or we couldn't take shower because there were no hot water. We just were thinking about are we going to stay alive today or are we going to die? And we were only praying all the time, and thanks God we are still alive. I'm Ruslana. I'm staying here in Poland at the church. My family are refugees from Ukraine. My mom, my siblings, sister and brother. Unfortunately, our father, he's a preacher and he's left in Ukraine. When the first day of war started, we hoped it will end soon, but it didn't. And the worst part was that our city, Bryansk, was occupied on the second and third days of war, so just from the start, and we couldn't leave the city at all. And the pharmacies, the food stores were completely empty. People couldn't buy food or even like simple medicines. And also we didn't have any network, or we couldn't even call that we are alive. And our grandmother, she was so worried, and we couldn't tell her that we are alive. It was so bad. Majority of us don't have relatives or friends here, and the only people who help is church. The church gonna give us a chance to have future and help us with the basic things. And here's a bedroom, so we slept here. And it's quite comfortable, it's warm here and nice. And we are really glad that church provided us a place to sleep in.
Jesus never asked, who are you? What is your nationality? Are you a good person or bad person? He was open. And I think this is a good example for us. When we are helping others, it's like Jesus' hands will be through us. We change because of Jesus, of His impact on us. And we want to be His hands. We want to be His feet.
The global humanitarian agency, ADRA, which is
the Venice Development and Relief Agency, ADRA, based here in
Internacional, que es la rama humanitaria de la Iglesia Adventista del Séptimo Día.
Iglesia Adventista de Recursos
Right
Assistenciais.
now, the organization has people in and around Ukraine, helping the hundreds of thousands of people fleeing.
The groups here at home are getting involved as well.
The Maryland A Group is going much farther, 5,000 miles farther, to provide direct help.
It's already providing shelter to refugees in youth centers and church buildings.
ADRA volunteers cross the border themselves into Ukraine with this convoy carrying supplies.
When they said like, don't worry, you can feel like at home here and we will help you because we are your brothers and sisters in God, they just supported us, and that meant so much.
I find it kind of difficult to watch some of these things when we see the suffering that people go through. There's one thing that the Polish Union president said when he was being interviewed. Their statement was that we don't ask people, are they good or bad? You know, we don't. We're there to help whoever needs the help. That's one thing I love about ADRA is that we basically help those that are in need, regardless of race, regardless of religion, regardless of their nationality, their political inclination. We're there to help whoever needs the help most. And that's how we work. So you could see in this video some of the things that we're doing to help out. And you know, when such a major catastrophe like this happens, many people are left wondering, how can I help? But this video showed you some of the ways that your church is helping through ADRA. And the local churches in that area, in these countries. It's because of our network of churches and the ability to mobilize our churches and our volunteers that has allowed us to make a difference in the lives of people so quickly and to be able to provide shelter so fast. Many of the churches in these neighboring countries to Ukraine and within, especially in the western part of Ukraine where the fighting hasn't been so significant, they open up their churches and turn their churches into hostels. Turn the churches into places to be able to serve meals for people. They did become sanctuaries for people. So there are many ways that we can help. I do want to throw out a plug for one thing that here in Canada and how we can help. I actually was met with some government officials last week, and they were saying that right now we're seeing approximately 1,000 people a day are coming to Canada from Ukraine. So these people need help. And ADRA has made funds available that if any churches are looking to help with those who are in need, we do actually have a fund set aside out of some of the monies that have been raised for Ukraine to be able to help support churches that want to help out with those that are coming to this country. I was looking up, I always like to learn a little bit about the community that I'm going to, and so I was looking up for Yorkton. I was amazed to see that it said 35% of the population of Yorkton is of Ukrainian descent. So it's quite interesting to see that, and we know that the prairies have a high Ukrainian population, and in addition to that, outside of Russia and Ukraine, Canada has the largest Ukrainian population in the world. At about 1.8 million people are of Ukrainian descent in our country. So it's very personal to us. I also want to talk about some other emergencies that we are responding to. In Yemen, Yemen has been considered the worst humanitarian disaster in the world. The number of people that are suffering from famine, from starvation, from the worst part about this, and similar to Ukraine, the people are suffering because of a man-made conflict. They're not suffering because an earthquake happened, or there was a tornado or a hurricane or a volcano. They're suffering because of man-made conflicts. And unfortunately, it's the innocent are the ones that suffer the most. Those that instigate the conflicts typically come out not too bad in the end. But it's these innocent people that we see suffering that really kind of is quite heartbreaking. In Yemen, we're responding in a few different ways. One is we are providing food assistance through a project that we have with the Canadian Food Grains Bank, and we're able to distribute food to many people in that country. An interesting part about Yemen is, so we, as I mentioned before, we work with our implementing partners on the ground. Yemen is pretty much an entirely Muslim country. The number of Adventists that live in Yemen can be measured in 2 digits. And we have approximately 1,600 employees in Yemen. Almost all of our employees in Yemen are of the Muslim faith because there are no Christians there to hire. So we have, I believe it's 5 or 6 of our employees are Adventists, and everyone else is from that faith. But they're able to learn about Christ. They're able to learn about why we do what we do through their interactions with ADRA. But that's one reason why we don't, people ask, why isn't ADRA evangelistic? And it's because if we were overtly evangelistic, we wouldn't be able to get into these countries. However, if you ask me, I think that when you provide somebody, when you meet the needs of others, they want to find out why you're doing these things, and they will learn about Christ through different methods. So meeting those needs and being the hands and feet of Christ is very important. Another thing we do in Yemen is, from the health perspective, many of the hospitals in the communities that we work in have been bombed. They've been destroyed. So what we do is we go into these areas and we help to rebuild their hospitals. We help to provide funding that pays the salaries of their doctors and nurses, because they're in areas where right now the government is in total disarray. They have 2 governments trying to run the same area. It is a full-out civil war. But with ADRA going in, we're able to help them open up medical facilities and provide much-needed medical assistance to those individuals that are suffering in that area. Then we work in Sudan. Sudan is a country that is constantly going through conflict. When I started working at ADRA and I was thinking about staff members going to Sudan, I didn't even want to sign off on them going there because I knew what Sudan was like. And they said, listen, we have to go. We need to go there because the needs are so high. And typically we're given a heads up. Hey, there's going to be a conflict that's going to happen in this area. We're doing development work and emergency work in Sudan. And conflict, I think since I've been working at ADRA over the last 4 years, there's probably been conflict that shut our office down probably at least 6 times. They kind of joke about it and say, oh, this is just the semi-annual outbreak that needs to take place. It happens, a week goes by, and things settle back down again. But we're doing development work. This is a very difficult country to do development work. Development is longer term projects. So we have our emergency where we come in. It may be providing food distribution. It may be helping to set up shelters for refugees, providing water. Development is working with more longer established communities and trying to take them over a period of 4, 5, 6 years to more sustainable ways of life. In Sudan, one of these communities we've been working in for about 1.5 years, and last month a conflict started up and they burned the entire village to the ground. So you're working in an area where you're trying to make a difference, you're trying to improve people's lives, and then something like this happens. But unfortunately that's the context that we work in. But there are many, many success stories, and if it wasn't for us being there, some of these people might not have even been alive to continue on and to rebuild their communities as well. So it comes with a lot of challenges, but it comes with many blessings as well when we're able to see the difference that we're able to make. In Sudan, 64% of the population remains in need of humanitarian assistance. That's an amazing number to think of. Imagine if in Canada, 25 million Canadians needed humanitarian assistance on a regular basis. We provide access to water, sanitation, and health services. We provide educational services in these areas that we're working. 50% of the girls in the Blue Nile region where we work are at risk of being married before the age of 18. And oftentimes these girls that get married, we've seen times where, girls that are 11, 12, 13 years old are married off to men in their 50s and 60s. These are the types of things that we go in to try to stop, and we're having great success in the communities we work in. There's one story I love to tell, and it's about a canceled wedding. We have a video about a canceled wedding, but time doesn't permit to show all the videos that we have. But this canceled wedding, it was a young girl who was 12 years old, and she was to be married to a man in his 60s. And through ADRA, we were able to convince this girl's parents that this is not good for your daughter, and there is a better way. Please keep your daughter in education. And we were able to provide her with access to education. And as long as we can keep the girls in school, they don't get married off early. So it's called a canceled wedding because her wedding was canceled. Her parents actually canceled the wedding, called it off, and said, no, our daughter is going to stay in school. And so that girl's life is going to be changed forever because of that. These are the types of things that keep me going to work every day and say, hey, we are making a difference in the world. Then there's Venezuela. Venezuela is such a challenging country because it went from being a very prosperous country. Venezuela used to be a supporting office in the ADRA network. Now they are in significant need. I visited Venezuela in late 2019. It was actually one of the last trips that I made before COVID kind of shut the world down. And being able to go in and meet the individuals that were receiving help from ADRA was quite amazing. When we talk about, so we're talking about inflation here and how inflation is having a real challenge for us. We're talking 7-8% inflation. Venezuela went through 5,500% inflation one year. So we went to the office in Venezuela and they had a mural made on the wall. They actually made a map of the world on their wall out of money because their money was so worthless that they just used it to make a map of the world instead because it was cheaper than paper. So these are the types of communities we work in. When you go through Venezuela, the bus stops had ceramic tile on the bus stops because of how prosperous the country used to be. So that stayed. But you go to the hospitals, and I would actually rather take my chances out on the street than go to a hospital to try to get healing. It was that bad to go through. I thought there's no way someone could get healing in a place like this, and that's what's happening in Venezuela. Is many people go in, and they just don't come out. We had one of our volunteers. So in a lot of our projects, we have volunteers. So they're provided a stipend to do work on our projects. And this is how, when I look at the difference we're able to make in the lives of others. One of our volunteers, his name was Horley, and he got into a motorcycle accident. A kid ran out in front of him. He swerved to miss the kid, and he ended up in an accident. They took him to the hospital, but unfortunately, because of the situation of their medical system, he just didn't survive. But when our ADRA Venezuela staff went to the funeral, there was a lady there that was completely distraught, so upset. So they went over and thought, this must be his grandmother or somebody. So they went, and he was a man in his early 20s. And when they asked, what was your relation to Horley, or were you his grandmother? And she said, no, he was my volunteer. So when you think about the impact that we can make in the lives of others by serving their needs and just meeting them, he was the volunteer in, what would it be like if we had such a connection to the people that came into our churches that they were that distraught if something ever happened to us that we were to pass away? That's just an example of the, how we can make those connections in people's lives. This is just a picture of a food distribution. So what we're doing in Venezuela is providing food for people, and then also providing non-food items such as hygiene kits, soap, diapers, shampoos, razors, all those sorts of things, because a lot of people in Venezuela, they have to make a decision on either hygiene or food. So if you can provide the hygiene items to them, then they can get the food themselves, or vice versa. The next slide that I have, I see my time is almost up, and I have another video. It's a 1-minute video. Before we go into this video, I just want to give a little bit of a preamble to this. One thing we're not seeing on the news right now very much is that the world is going through a hunger crisis that's expected to be worse than anything we've ever seen. So when we think back to the early 80s, and when we think back to all the images that used to come on TV about those that were starving in Africa, right now it's anticipated that by the end of this year it's going to be worse than it ever has been. So this video is going to just highlight a little bit about that hunger crisis. But this hunger crisis right now is something that it's already too late to be acting. We're already behind on when we need to act. But I'm just going to play the video. I'll make a few last comments and then close in prayer.
ADRA urgently needs your help to save lives in the current food shortage crisis. The cost of food around the world is higher than it has ever been. The World Food Program estimates that right now, 345 million people are experiencing food insecurity, and of that number, 50 million are in crisis. Ethiopia, Somalia, and South Sudan are experiencing famines. COVID, climate change, and the war in Ukraine have disrupted supply chains that import food, fertilizer, and fuel to areas that need them the most. This is where you come in. The Canadian government has announced a plan to match donations made through Canada's humanitarian coalition up to a maximum of $5 million. As a member of this coalition, ADRA is asking Canadians to give generously to this cause. Donate through ADRA between June 15 and July 17, 2022, and the Canadian government will match your donation dollar for dollar. Your generous gift will relieve suffering and save lives. Thank you for supporting the fight against hunger.
So it's estimated right now that there are about 25,000 people a day that are dying from starvation. That's expected to get even worse. One report that I received from our office in Somalia had indicated that they had, there were 13,000 people that were in famine right now. They estimate that by the time they get to the end of August, early September, that number will have increased up to about 213,000 people that are in famine. So what our goal is to get in and provide that life-saving support so that those people who are dealing with famine will be able to survive through this difficult time. A couple of things that are impacting to that are the inflation that we're seeing. In Ethiopia, what we would pay for a basket of food, what we would consider a ration of food for somebody, has increased 66% this year. So that $1 million can only buy, the amount of buying power from $1 million now is drastically decreased for the amount of food we're able to get. When we look at Ukraine, the war in Ukraine has had a significant impact on the lives of many, because in the Horn of Africa, they're going through the 5th year of drought. The fifth consecutive season of drought. 1/3 of their grain comes from Ukraine, typically, and that food's not getting to them either. So that's why this is getting so dire. I don't like leaving things on such a negative note, so I do want to just highlight again some of the positives that we have, and you can see in the imagery here. I love the imagery of this young girl. When I saw that picture, the first time I saw that picture, so she's from Sudan, and she was dancing at. We had just opened up a water source in her community. So now, instead of having to walk 5 kilometers to fetch water from a hole that probably wasn't very good to drink from in the first place, she's able to go over within a couple hundred meters of her home, collect up that water, and take it back. So we see these celebrations, and these celebrations really build us up to keep going. You see the young gentleman there carrying a box on his head. That's a box of food that he's been provided to be able to take back to his family. So while I know I've painted a dire picture, and I think it kind of goes along the lines of the crucibles that we see in the lesson this week, there are lots of positive things to focus on as well. And there's a lot that we can do to help and to make a difference in the lives of those that are suffering and struggling around the world. So thanks for your attention. I will say, so I'm going to be around for the day. I love getting to meet people, and I don't know most of you. So while I'm around today, I'd love to be able to get to speak with some of you. So please feel free to come up, introduce yourself to me, and look forward to being able to meet some of you throughout the day. And I will now close with the word of prayer as we get ready to move into the divine service time. Father in heaven, Lord, I thank you so much for the blessings that you give us, for the ways that you work in our lives. And though sometimes we go through hardships and struggles, we also recognize that there are many, many positive and good things that you do in our lives. I want to thank you for the time to be able to spend here at camp. Pray for you to bless our time together. Please bless each one that is gathered here today. As we go forward, I pray that you will give us the wisdom we need to be the hands and feet of Christ, to be able to show your character to the many people that we interact with throughout our lives. And may you help us to be a blessing to others. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.